My name is Deborah. I am 68 years old, and I never thought my own son would break my heart this way. My daughter-in-law, Jenny, was throwing a birthday party for my grandson, Mason, but I wasn't invited. I found out about it on social media, so I bought Mason that expensive Lego set he'd been begging for, and decided to surprise him. As I walked into the backyard, I heard Jenny say, "Why is she even still alive?" I froze in place. If you've ever been betrayed by family, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button. My story might help you understand you're not alone. I became a widow 5 years ago when my husband Howard passed away after 40 wonderful years together. It was the hardest thing I'd ever experienced, but I found strength in my relationship with our only son, Thomas. Now 38, Thomas had always been the light of my life. I can still remember the day he was born, how Howard and I counted his tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the perfect little person we had created. Growing up, Thomas and I had an incredibly close bond. I was the mom who never missed a baseball game or school play. Howard worked long hours at his engineering firm to provide for us, so Thomas and I spent countless evenings together, baking cookies, working on science projects, or just talking about his dreams for the future. I was so proud when Thomas got accepted to MIT on a partial scholarship. Howard and I had saved every penny we could for his education, and I took on extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse to help cover the remaining costs. Those were lean years, but seeing my son flourish made every sacrifice worthwhile. After graduation, Thomas started his own tech company. Those early startup days were tough, and I remember lending him $20,000 from my retirement fund to keep the business afloat during a critical period. I never asked for that money back, even when the company began to succeed. That was what mothers did, I thought. We give without expecting anything in return. Thomas met Jenny during this time. She was working in marketing, and they connected at an industry conference. When he first brought her home for dinner, she seemed pleasant enough, if a bit reserved. She complimented my cooking and asked appropriate questions about our family photos. I tried to warm to her because Thomas was clearly smitten. After their wedding 4 years ago, things started to change subtly. Jenny always had a reason why they couldn't make it to Sunday dinners. At first, the excuses were reasonable, related to work commitments or prior engagements. I understood, though, I missed seeing them. When little Mason came along 3 years ago, I was overjoyed thinking a grandchild would naturally bring us closer. For a while it did. I was allowed to babysit Mason occasionally, and those moments with my grandson were precious. He had Thomas's curious eyes and Howard's gentle demeanor, but gradually, Jenny began to restrict my time with him, always finding a reason why my scheduled visits needed to be shortened or rescheduled. "He's been fussy today," she would say, or "We've got a play date I forgot about." The excuses mounted, and my time with Mason dwindled. I noticed the relationship with Thomas changing too. My once affectionate son became more distant. Our phone conversations grew shorter, more formal. When I asked about their lives or offered to help with Mason, Thomas would quickly change the subject or tell me they had everything under control. "Mom, we've got this," became his standard response, shutting down any further discussion. I didn't understand what was happening. Had I said something wrong? Had I somehow offended Jenny? I replayed our interactions in my mind, searching for clues, but came up empty. All I knew was that the warm, loving relationship I had always shared with my son was cooling rapidly, and I had no idea why. The first real sign that something was seriously wrong came when Thomas missed my birthday dinner. He had never missed it before, not even during his busiest times at MIT, or when his company was in its critical early stages. Howard had always made my birthday special, and after his passing, Thomas had taken up the tradition, making sure I never spent the day alone. But last year, just 2 hours before he was supposed to pick me up, Thomas called with a vague excuse about an emergency client meeting. His voice sounded strange, almost rehearsed. "I'm really sorry, Mom," he said. "This client flew in unexpectedly from Japan, It's a potential multi-million-dollar deal. I can't reschedule. I sat at my dining room table alone that night, the special meal I'd prepared going cold. Margaret, my closest friend since nursing school, called to wish me happy birthday, and immediately sensed something was wrong. Thomas canceled, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. Work emergency. Again, Margaret's tone was skeptical. That's the third time he's canceled plans in 2 months. First your doctor's appointment, then the garden center trip, and now your birthday. Hearing it laid out like that made the pattern impossible to ignore. Thomas had indeed been increasingly unreliable, breaking commitments with last-minute excuses that never quite rang true. The following week, I tried to schedule lunch with Thomas alone, thinking perhaps we could talk more freely without Jenny present. He agreed initially, then texted the morning of to say he couldn't make it after all. This time, it was a daycare issue with Mason. When I offered to help with Mason instead, suggesting I could pick him up from daycare, his response was oddly sharp. No, Mom. Jenny's already handling it. The rejection stung. I had been a pediatric nurse for 35 years before retirement. Surely I was capable of caring for my own grandson during an emergency. Things deteriorated further when I realized I hadn't been invited to Mason's preschool Christmas pageant. I only discovered it had happened when I saw photos on Jenny's sister's social media page. Mason was dressed as a little shepherd, beaming proudly. Thomas, Jenny, and her parents were all in the audience, according to the captions. But I hadn't even known about it. When I cautiously mentioned this to Thomas, his response was defensive. It was just a small school thing, Mom. Not a big deal. The room was tiny, very limited seating. Yet the photos showed a large auditorium with plenty of empty chairs. Margaret, who had become increasingly concerned about the situation, suggested something I hadn't wanted to consider. Deb, she said gently over coffee one morning. I hate to say this, but it sounds like Jenny might be deliberately coming between you and Thomas. I dismissed the idea initially. That's ridiculous. Why would she do that? I've seen it before, Margaret persisted. My cousin went through something similar with her daughter-in-law. Classic isolation tactics. They start small, then escalate until the parent is completely cut out. I shook my head, unwilling to believe Thomas would allow such a thing. Thomas loves me. He wouldn't let that happen. Sometimes, Margaret said carefully, these things happen so gradually that the person doesn't even realize they're being manipulated until it's too late. Her words stayed with me, planting a seed of doubt I couldn't quite shake. Was it possible? Was Jenny systematically cutting me out of their lives? And if so, why was Thomas allowing it? The final confirmation came when Thomas forgot to call on the anniversary of Howard's death. This was something we had always marked together, usually by visiting the cemetery, and then sharing lunch and memories afterward. When I called him late that afternoon, he sounded genuinely confused, then horrified when he realized the date. Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry, he stammered. I've been swamped with work and I forgot. I heard Jenny's voice in the background asking who was calling. When Thomas told her, I distinctly heard her say, "Tell her we're busy. We have dinner plans." Thomas didn't relay the message directly, but he did end the call quickly, promising to make it up to me sometime soon. That vague promise never materialized into concrete plans. By then, I could no longer deny that something was very wrong. The son, who had once been my closest ally, was now a distant figure in my life, accessible only on someone else's terms, according to someone else's schedule. And I was beginning to suspect exactly who was setting that schedule. The discovery that truly broke my heart came on a sunny Tuesday morning in April. I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a post from one of Thomas's college friends, Patrick, who still kept me as a contact. He had commented on another mutual friend's status. Looking forward to seeing you at Mason's birthday bash this weekend. Jenny always throws the best parties. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Mason's birthday was indeed that Saturday, but Thomas had told me just 3 days earlier that they were just doing a small thing at his school and that they'd drop by sometime next week to see me. With shaking hands, I clicked on Patrick's profile and found more comments about the upcoming party. Apparently, it was going to be a big superhero-themed event in Thomas and Jenny's backyard, with a rented bouncy castle face painting and catering. I sat back, the truth hitting me like a physical blow. They were deliberately excluding me from my own grandson's birthday celebration. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an oversight. This was intentional. That evening, I called Thomas, trying to keep my voice casual. "So, about Mason's birthday on Saturday, what time should I come over?" There was a telling pause before Thomas responded. We're not really doing anything, Mom. Just a small thing at school, like I said. His teacher is bringing cupcakes." The lie was so blatant that I almost couldn't believe he was saying it to me, his mother who had raised him to value honesty above all else. Howard would have been so disappointed. "That's strange," I said, my voice steady despite my breaking heart. "Because Patrick mentioned a party at your house, with a bouncy castle." Another long pause. "Oh, that," Thomas finally said. "Yeah, we decided to have a few friends over. Just very casual, nothing special." "I see," I replied. "And was I going to be invited to this casual gathering?" "Mom, it's really just for the kids and their parents from Mason's class," he said, the lie continuing to grow. "It would be pretty boring for you." "I see," I repeated, not trusting myself to say more. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, tears streaming down my face. This deliberate exclusion from a significant event in my grandson's life wasn't just hurtful, it was cruel. What had I done to deserve this treatment? What possible justification could there be for keeping a grandmother away from her grandchild's birthday celebration? The next day, I went shopping and bought Mason the Lego Millennium Falcon set he'd been talking about for months. It was expensive, nearly $300, but Mason was obsessed with Star Wars, and I wanted him to have something special from me, even if I wasn't welcome at his party. As Saturday approached, I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to respect their boundaries, however painful and inexplicable they were. But another part of me, a stronger part, refused to be erased from my grandson's life without at least understanding why. By Saturday morning, I had made my decision. I would go to the house not to cause a scene, but to deliver Mason's gift and perhaps finally get some answers. I spent extra time on my appearance, choosing a flattering blue dress that Howard had always loved, applying light makeup and styling my silver hair carefully. If I was going to face whatever was happening, I wanted to do it with dignity. The drive to Thomas and Jenny's suburban home took 30 minutes. As I approached their street, I could see several cars parked outside their house. Clearly, this was no small gathering of Mason's classmates. This was a full-scale party, exactly as Patrick had described. I parked a little way down the street and sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my courage. From inside my purse, I took out the small framed photo I always carried, one of Howard, Thomas, and me at Thomas's college graduation. We looked so happy, so united. What had happened to that family? With Mason's gift in hand, I walked up the driveway. Music and laughter drifted from the backyard, confirming my suspicions about the size and scope of the celebration. Rather than ringing the front doorbell, I decided to walk around the side of the house to the backyard gate. Perhaps seeing everyone gathered would help me understand what I was dealing with. As I approached the gate, I recognized more voices. Jenny's parents were there along with her sister. I heard neighbors I had met at previous gatherings, colleagues of Thomas's from work, and several other voices I couldn't immediately identify. And then, standing partially hidden by a large decorative bush near the gate, I heard Jenny's distinctive voice speaking to someone in a low, confidential tone. "I don't understand why she's even still alive. Life would be so much easier if we didn't have to worry about her anymore." I froze, my hand on the gate latch. The words were so shocking that for a moment I wondered if I had misheard. But then another voice, Jenny's mother, responded. "Jennifer, that's a terrible thing to say, even as a joke." "Who's joking?" Jenny replied. "Every time the phone rings, I worry it's her wanting something, needing something. Thomas feels obligated to her and it's holding us back. We could have moved to the Seattle office last year if it wasn't for her." My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they must hear it. I peered through a gap in the fence and saw them standing near the outdoor bar. Jenny Thomas and Jenny's mother. And most devastatingly, I saw Thomas's response to his wife's horrible statement. He didn't defend me. He didn't express shock. He simply looked down at his drink and gave a small, uncomfortable laugh, as if his mother's continued existence was indeed an inconvenience he was too polite to mention. In that moment, I felt something inside me break. The son I had raised, the boy I had poured every ounce of love and support into, was standing by while his wife wished for my death, and he was saying nothing to contradict her. I must have made some sound, a gasp or a sob, because suddenly the gate swung open. Mason stood there, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma!" he shouted, rushing forward to hug my legs. "You came to my party!" And behind him, I saw the faces of Jenny and Thomas turn toward me, shock and then horrified realization dawning as they understood exactly what I had overheard. Instead of turning away, instead of sparing them the confrontation, I took a deep breath and stepped through the gate, into the yard, and into the truth of what my family had become. For a moment, the backyard seemed frozen in a tableau of awkwardness. Jenny's face had gone pale, then flushed dark red. Thomas looked like he might be sick. Mason, oblivious to the tension, continued to hug my legs tightly. "I brought you a present, sweetheart," I said to Mason, keeping my voice steady for his sake. I handed him the large wrapped package. "Wow, it's heavy." Mason's eyes widened as he took the gift. He immediately began tearing off the paper, and his shriek of excitement when he saw the Lego Millennium Falcon was genuine. "It's the big one, the really big one. Dad, look what Grandma got me." Thomas stepped forward, his expression a complex mix of shame and forced politeness. "That's very generous, Mom. Mason, what do you say?" "Thank you, Grandma." Mason hugged me again, this time nearly knocking me over with his enthusiasm. Jenny quickly intervened, her hostess smile firmly in place, but not reaching her eyes. "Mason, why don't you take your amazing gift inside and show it to your friends? The other kids are in the playroom." As Mason ran off happily with his treasure, Jenny turned to me, voice low and tight. "Deborah, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I replied, my voice just as controlled. Though I'm not sure why, considering every other person in Thomas's life seems to have been invited. Several nearby guests had noticed the exchange and were watching with undisguised curiosity. I recognized Patrick and his wife, a few of Thomas's work colleagues, and several neighbors. Jenny's entire family was there, including cousins I'd only met once at the wedding. "Mom," Thomas finally spoke, stepping closer. "Maybe we should talk inside." "Yes, let's do that," I agreed, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Jenny glanced around nervously at the watching guests. "Thomas, the caterers need direction about serving the cake. Why don't you handle that while I speak with your mother?" "No," I said firmly, looking directly at my son. "I need to speak with both of you. Now." Something in my tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Thomas nodded. "Let's go to the kitchen." As we walked into the house, I noticed more guests inside, milling around the living room, where tables of food had been set up. This wasn't just a children's party. This was a major social event, planned and executed with great care, from which I had been deliberately excluded. The kitchen was mercifully empty. Jenny closed the door behind us, then immediately went on the offensive. I don't appreciate you crashing Mason's party like this, Deborah. If you wanted to give him a gift, you could have mailed it or dropped it off another time. I looked at her for a long moment, then turned to my son. Thomas, I heard what Jenny said outside, about wondering why I'm still alive. Thomas flinched visibly. Mom, she didn't mean it like that. It was just a figure of speech. Don't lie to me, I said quietly. Not anymore. I heard everything, including your response, which was to laugh. So I want to know right now what's happening here. Why have you been systematically cutting me out of your lives? What have I done to deserve this treatment? Jenny crossed her arms defensively. You've always been too involved, Deborah, too controlling. Thomas can't make a decision without worrying about what Mommy will think. Thomas looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her. This emboldened Jenny to continue. And frankly, you're a financial burden, always hinting about needing help with house repairs or medical bills. This accusation was so false that I actually laughed. What I have never asked Thomas for money, not once since he became an adult. In fact, I loaned him $20,000 to keep his business afloat 5 years ago, money I've never asked to be repaid. Jenny rolled her eyes. That's what you say, but Thomas tells me a different story. I turned to my son, genuinely shocked. Is that true? Have you told Jenny I ask you for money? Thomas couldn't meet my eyes. Not exactly, he mumbled. Then what exactly? I pressed. He told me how you guilt him about all the sacrifices you made, Jenny interjected. How you remind him constantly about the loans, the second mortgage on your house for his college, how you worked extra shifts. It's emotional blackmail. I felt as if I'd been slapped. I have never, ever used those things to guilt Thomas. Yes, your father and I made sacrifices for you, but that's what parents do. We did it out of love, not to create an obligation. Thomas finally looked up. You bring it up a lot, Mom. Maybe not directly asking for repayment, but always reminding me. I shook my head, bewildered. If I've mentioned those things, it was only to express how proud I am of you that our sacrifices paid off. I never meant it as a guilt trip. See, that's the problem, Jenny said triumphantly. You don't even realize how manipulative you are. And then there's the way you try to undermine my parenting, always suggesting different ways to handle Mason as if I don't know how to raise my own child. I've made a few suggestions based on my experience as a pediatric nurse. I defended myself. That's hardly undermining you. It is when you do it constantly, Jenny shot back. And then there's the way you've turned Thomas's friends against me. Patrick and Alicia always take your side. This accusation was so bizarre that I couldn't even formulate a response. I hadn't seen Patrick and Alicia more than twice a year at various gatherings. But the real issue, Jenny continued, her voice getting louder, is the inheritance. Howard left everything to Thomas in his will, but you're still controlling it, aren't you? Doling it out in small amounts, keeping Thomas dependent on you. And suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about my behavior at all. This was about money. Is that what this is really about? I asked, looking at Thomas. Your father's inheritance. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. Jenny thinks we should have full control of the assets, for investment purposes. Investment purposes? I repeated slowly. Thomas, your father left the house and his savings to both of us jointly. And the investment portfolio is in a trust with specific conditions for distribution that Howard set up with his financial advisor. Conditions you could change if you wanted to, Jenny insisted. But you like having that power over us. You like knowing Thomas has to keep you happy to access what should rightfully be his. I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd experienced before. Is that why you've been cutting me out of your lives, because you think I'm standing between you and Howard's money? It's not just that, Thomas said quickly, shooting a warning look at Jenny. Things have been complicated, and we felt it would be better to have some space. Space, I echoed. You've been lying to me, excluding me from my grandson's life, and apparently discussing how convenient it would be if I died. That's not space, Thomas. That's cruelty. Jenny made an exasperated sound. You're so dramatic. This is exactly why we've limited contact. Every little thing becomes a huge emotional scene with you. I turned to her, my patience at an end. Let me be very clear, Jenny. I heard you wish for my death. My son, the boy I raised, stood there and laughed. There is no misinterpreting that, no excusing it, and no minimizing it. So don't tell me I'm being dramatic when I react to something so profoundly hurtful. Thomas finally seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Mom, I didn't laugh because I agreed with her. I laughed because I was uncomfortable. I know it was wrong. But you didn't defend me, I said softly. You didn't say, don't talk about my mother that way. You stood there and went along with it just like you've gone along with everything else apparently, including lying to me about why you've been avoiding me. Thomas looked down, unable to meet my gaze. Jenny convinced me that you were toxic, that you were trying to control our lives. She showed me articles about narcissistic parents and said you fit the profile. And you believed that? I asked, hurt beyond measure. After 38 years of loving you, supporting you, being there for you through everything, you were so easily convinced that I was toxic. It wasn't easy, he said defensively. But Jenny was so certain, and she had examples. Examples that she misinterpreted or possibly invented. I finished for him. Thomas, I have never tried to control your life. All I've ever wanted was to be included in it, to have a relationship with you and with Mason. That's not true, Jenny interrupted. You've always wanted Thomas to yourself. You call too often, you expect him to solve all your problems, you try to dictate how we raise Mason. Can you give me a single concrete example of any of those things? I challenged her. Jenny faltered momentarily, then rallied. You call almost weekly. Once a week is too often to speak to my only child, I asked incredulously. You asked Thomas to fix your garbage disposal last month, she continued. Yes, and he said he was too busy, so I called a plumber, I countered. I didn't insist or make a fuss. You told me Mason should wear a coat in 50-degree weather, Jenny said triumphantly, as if this proved her point. I had to laugh at the absurdity. That's not controlling, Jenny. That's grandmotherly concern. And it was actually 40 degrees and raining when I suggested that. Thomas was watching this exchange with growing discomfort. Look, maybe we all need to take a step back and cool down. No, I said firmly. We need to address this now. I want to understand why my daughter-in-law wishes I were dead, and why my son is apparently fine with that. I don't wish you were dead, Jenny protested, though without much conviction. You literally said, why is she even still alive? I reminded her. What else could that possibly mean? Jenny glanced at Thomas, clearly hoping he would intervene, but he remained silent, looking increasingly miserable. Fine, Jenny finally snapped. Yes, life would be easier if you weren't in the picture. Thomas feels constant guilt about you living alone. He worries about your health, your finances, your social life. It's exhausting for him, which affects our marriage and our family. So, instead of being honest about those feelings, you decided to secretly cut me out of your lives, I asked. To lie to me about events, to exclude me from my grandson's birthday, to talk about me as if I'm a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. We were trying to establish boundaries, Jenny insisted. Boundaries are established through communication, not deception, I replied. If you felt I was too involved, you could have had an adult conversation with me about it. We tried, Jenny exclaimed. You just don't listen. When? I challenged. When did you ever directly tell me I was overstepping? Jenny looked to Thomas for support, but he shook his head slightly. We didn't, Mom, he admitted. We should have talked to you directly. Yes, you should have, I agreed, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Instead, you've broken my heart in ways I didn't think possible." There was a knock at the kitchen door, and Patrick poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but the cake is ready, and the kids are getting restless." Thomas nodded quickly, seeming relieved by the interruption. "We'll be right there." As Patrick withdrew, Jenny turned to me. "We need to get back to the party. You can stay if you want, but please don't make a scene." The condescension in her tone was the final straw. After everything I'd just learned, she was still treating me as if I were the problem. "I'm not going to make a scene, Jenny," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I am going to say one more thing before you go back to your guests. Thomas, your father would be deeply disappointed in the man you've become. He raised you to be honest, loyal, and kind, especially to family. What you've done, allowing your wife to isolate me and speak about me with such contempt, goes against everything he taught you, everything we both taught you." Thomas's face crumpled at the mention of his father. "Mom, please." "No, you need to hear this," I continued. "I've never used guilt as a weapon against you, despite what Jenny has convinced you. But I am telling you now that your behavior has been shameful. And as for the inheritance you're so concerned about, Jenny, you should know that Howard was smarter than you give him credit for. The bulk of his estate is in a trust that I couldn't access early even if I wanted to. And most of it is designated for Mason's education, not for your investment purposes." Jenny's face darkened with anger. "You had no right to make those decisions without consulting us." "I didn't make them," I clarified. "Howard did with his financial advisor before he died, and given what I've learned today, I think he was very wise to do so." I picked up my purse from where I'd set it on the counter. "Now I'm going to say goodbye to my grandson, and then I'll leave you to your party. But know this, Thomas. From this moment on, I will not beg for a place in your life. I will not call weekly hoping you'll deign to speak to me. I will not send gifts that go unacknowledged or make suggestions that get twisted into control. The door to my heart and my home remains open to you and to Mason, but the effort to rebuild what you've broken will have to come from you." I turned to leave, but Thomas caught my arm. "Mom, wait, don't go like this." I looked at my son, this man I had raised from infancy, who now seemed like a stranger to me. "How should I go, Thomas?" With a smile, pretending I didn't hear my daughter-in-law wish me dead, and my son laugh in response. With gratitude that I was allowed to deliver a birthday gift to my grandson after being deliberately excluded from his celebration. With quiet acceptance of the lies and manipulation that have defined our relationship for the past 2 years. Thomas had no answer, and I hadn't expected one. I gently removed his hand from my arm and walked out of the kitchen, head held high, despite the tears threatening to spill over. In the living room, I found Mason showing his new Lego set to a group of wide-eyed friends. When he saw me, he ran over. "Are you leaving already, Grandma?" I knelt down to his level, ignoring the curious glances from the adult guests nearby. "Yes, sweetheart. I have to go now, but I want you to have a wonderful birthday. I love you very much, and I'm so proud of what a kind, smart boy you're becoming." Mason hugged me tightly. "Can you come over soon and help me build my spaceship? Dad's not very good at Legos." Over Mason's shoulder, I saw Thomas and Jenny emerge from the kitchen, both looking tense and uncomfortable. "You'll have to ask your mom and dad about that," I told Mason. "But I would love to build it with you anytime." As I stood up, I found myself facing a semicircle of curious guests, including Patrick and his wife, Alicia, Jenny's parents, and several neighbors. The tension in the air was palpable, and I realized they had probably heard at least parts of the heated discussion in the kitchen. Rather than slink away in embarrassment, I made a split-second decision. These people had been fed a narrative about me for years, likely painting me as the difficult, controlling mother-in-law who needed to be managed and avoided. It was time they heard the truth. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Deborah Thomas's mother. I said, my voice clear and steady. I wasn't invited to my grandson's birthday party, but I came anyway when I found out about it through social media. I've just learned that the reason I wasn't invited and the reason I've been gradually excluded from my son's life is because my daughter-in-law finds my continued existence inconvenient, and my son lacks the courage to stand up for me. Gasps and uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the group. Jenny stepped forward, face contorted with rage. That is not true. Deborah is twisting everything as usual. I heard you say, and I quote, "Why is she even still alive?" I replied calmly. There's no context in which that statement is acceptable when referring to your husband's mother. Jenny's father, a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, turned to his daughter in shock. Jennifer, tell me you didn't say that. Jenny's face flushed crimson. She's exaggerating. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I said firmly. And now I'm leaving. I just wanted you all to know why I won't be at future gatherings. It's not by choice. It's because I've been deliberately excluded by Jenny with Thomas's tacit approval. With that, I walked toward the front door, leaving stunned silence in my wake. As I passed Patrick, he squeezed my arm gently in support. I'll call you later, Mrs. W., he whispered. I nodded gratefully and continued on, pausing only once more to wave to Mason, who was watching the adult drama with confused eyes. Then I walked out of the house, got into my car, and allowed myself to finally break down in tears as I drove away from the son who had broken my heart. The days following Mason's birthday party were some of the darkest I'd experienced since Howard's death. The betrayal cut so deep that at times I could barely breathe through the pain of it. I kept replaying Jenny's words and Thomas's laughter in my mind, each recollection like a fresh stab wound. I didn't answer my phone for 3 days, unable to face speaking to anyone. On the 4th day, I finally listened to my voicemail. There were 7 messages from Thomas, each one increasingly desperate, and one from Patrick asking if I was okay and offering his support. But it was a message from Margaret that finally motivated me to pick up the phone. Deborah, I'm standing on your porch with a bottle of wine and 2 pints of chocolate ice cream. If you don't open this door in the next 5 minutes, I'm calling the police for a welfare check. Knowing Margaret would absolutely follow through on this threat, I dragged myself to the door. She took one look at my tear-stained face and puffy eyes and enveloped me in a tight hug. Oh, Deb, she said softly. What happened? Over wine and ice cream, I told her everything from the moment I discovered the party on social media to my dramatic exit. Margaret listened without interrupting her expression, moving from shock to outrage to deep sympathy. I knew something was wrong, she said when I finished, but I never imagined it was this bad. That little witch actually said she wished you were dead. I nodded miserably. And Thomas laughed. My own son, Marg. How do I ever get past that? Margaret squeezed my hand. One day at a time, like everything else. But you know what, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. The old Deb would have swallowed her hurt and made excuses for them. She was right. Before Howard's death, I had been a peacekeeper, sometimes to my own detriment. Howard had been the backbone of our family, the one who set boundaries and stood firm when necessary. Without him, I had been trying to keep everyone happy, afraid of losing anyone else I loved. I couldn't just pretend it didn't happen, I said. Not this time. Good, Margaret declared. And now we need to focus on how you move forward. Moving forward proved to be a slow, painful process. Thomas called daily for the first week, but I wasn't ready to speak with him. Instead, I texted that I needed time and would contact him when I was ready. His response was a flurry of apologetic texts that I read but didn't answer. Patrick and Alicia reached out as well, inviting me to dinner. I accepted, curious about what had happened after I left the party. According to them, my departure had triggered a major scene. Jenny had tried to dismiss my claims, but several guests had overheard parts of our kitchen confrontation. Jenny's own father had been horrified by her behavior and had demanded an explanation right there in front of everyone. It was like watching a dam break, Patrick told me over dinner at their home. All these people who'd been fed this story about you for years suddenly saw the truth, and Thomas just stood there looking shell-shocked. Jenny tried to salvage the situation, Alicia added, but then Mason innocently asked why his grandma wasn't allowed to come to his party and why his mom had said mean things about her. He'd overheard more than anyone realized. Learning that my personal trauma had become a public spectacle didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it added a layer of humiliation to the pain. But there was a small vindictive part of me that was glad Jenny had been exposed for what she was. 2 weeks after the party, Thomas showed up at my door unannounced. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. I almost didn't let him in, but some residual maternal instinct wouldn't let me turn him away. "Mom," he began as soon as we were seated in the living room. "I don't even know where to start." "How about with the truth?" I suggested. "The complete truth for once." Thomas nodded, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Howard that it made my heart ache. "Jenny and I are separating," he said flatly. "After what happened at the party, things imploded. Her parents were appalled by what she said about you, and that opened the floodgates. Suddenly, everyone was sharing stories about how she'd talked about you behind your back for years, making up all sorts of things." "What kinds of things?" I asked, morbidly curious. Thomas looked ashamed. "That you were manipulative, controlling, that you'd tried to sabotage our wedding, that you criticized her parenting constantly. None of it was true, but she said it so often that I started to believe it. Or at least I started to doubt my own perceptions." "Why, Thomas?" I asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Why would you believe such terrible things about me after everything we've been through together?" He was quiet for a long moment. I think I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of losing her," he admitted. "Jenny has a way of making everything black and white. You're either completely on her side, or you're the enemy. There's no middle ground. And I was afraid that if I didn't agree with her about you, she'd leave, take Mason, and I'd lose my family. So instead, you sacrificed your relationship with me." I said, the hurt still raw. "Yes," he acknowledged. "And it was wrong. So wrong. I betrayed you in the worst way possible, and I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me. But I need you to know that I do love you, Mom. I've always loved you. I just got lost somewhere along the way." Tears filled my eyes. "You broke my heart, Thomas. Do you understand that when I heard Jenny say those things and saw you laugh, it was like something died inside me?" "I know." He whispered, his own eyes wet. "And I will regret that moment for the rest of my life." We talked for hours that day, painful, honest conversation that stripped away years of misunderstandings and manipulations. Thomas revealed that Jenny had been intercepting my text messages on his phone, deleting voicemails, and even hiding cards and gifts I'd sent to Mason. She had systematically worked to erase me from their lives while making it seem like I was the one pulling away. "I should have seen it," Thomas said, disgusted with himself. "There were so many red flags, but I was too blinded by what I thought was love to recognize them." By the time he left that evening, we had reached a fragile truce. The deep wound between us wouldn't heal overnight, and I made that clear to him. Trust once shattered took time and consistent effort to rebuild. But we had made a start. In the months that followed, I focused on healing myself. I joined a support group for family estrangement where I met others who had experienced similar betrayals from loved ones. Hearing their stories helped me feel less alone and gave me tools for setting healthy boundaries. I also rediscovered painting, a passion I had set aside decades ago, when motherhood and career demands took precedence. Every afternoon, I would set up my easel in the sunroom Howard had built for me, put on classical music, and lose myself in color and light. The act of creation became a form of therapy, helping me process my grief and anger. Thomas filed for divorce 3 months after the party incident. The proceedings were messy and contentious, with Jenny fighting for full custody of Mason and making wild accusations about both Thomas and me. Fortunately, the judge saw through her tactics, especially after Patrick and several other witnesses testified about what they had seen and heard at the birthday party. Thomas and Jenny were granted joint custody, with Mason spending weekdays with Thomas and weekends with Jenny. This arrangement allowed me to rebuild my relationship with my grandson. Gradually, always careful not to speak ill of Jenny in his presence despite the temptation. 1 year after the fateful birthday party, I invited Thomas and Mason over for dinner. As we sat in the dining room using Howard's mother's china that I saved for special occasions, I realized that while the pain hadn't disappeared entirely, it had receded enough to allow for new growth in our relationship. "Dad says you saved him," Mason announced as he helped me clear the dishes with the directness that only an 8-year-old can manage. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, surprised. "He says you were strong when he was weak, and that made him want to be strong too," Mason explained carefully, placing plates in the dishwasher. "He cried when he said it, but he told me that sometimes grown-ups cry when they're getting better, not just when they're sad." I had to turn away to hide my own tears. Later, when Mason was absorbed in a video game, Thomas and I sat on the porch swing that had been Howard's favorite spot. "Did you really tell Mason I saved you?" I asked. Thomas nodded. "You did. By standing up to us that day, by refusing to be treated that way, you showed me what real strength looks like. I was letting Jenny's toxicity poison our entire family because I was too afraid to stand up to her. You showed me a better way." I took his hand, this man who had hurt me so deeply, but who was still always my beloved son. "I wish your father could see you now," I said softly. "He'd be proud of how you've turned things around." Thomas squeezed my hand. "I think he does see, and I think he's proud of both of us." 3 years have passed since that terrible birthday party. The journey hasn't been easy, but it has been worth it. Thomas is a different man now, more confident and self-aware. He's rebuilt his life without Jenny's toxic influence, focusing on being a good father to Mason and repairing our relationship. Jenny moved to another state last year after meeting someone new. Her contact with Mason is sporadic, which saddens me for his sake, but he has adjusted remarkably well. Children are resilient when surrounded by love, and between Thomas, me, and our extended circle of friends who became like family during the darkest times, Mason has plenty of love in his life. As for me, I've learned that sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we love most, but they don't have to define us. I've learned the value of standing up for myself, of setting boundaries, and of requiring respect from everyone in my life, even family. Most importantly, I've learned that true healing doesn't mean forgetting the hurt, but rather building something new and beautiful from the broken pieces. So, if you've ever experienced betrayal from someone you love, if you've ever had to make the painful choice to stand up for yourself even when it meant possible rejection, know that you're not alone. Tell me in the comments about a time when you had to be brave in the face of family betrayal, or how you handled a situation where you felt disrespected by loved ones. Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect, especially from family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes walking through the hardest moments leads to unexpected strength.